Hello, Ian. Thank you for joining me and the Canada Coach Academy team for this interview today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, good. Let's jump right in. Please tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I was born in the United Kingdom, but grew up in Africa, in Kenya and South Africa. I then went and worked and lived in Hong Kong for a decade.
Mhm.
Went back to the United Kingdom. Came to North America in 2002, initially in the United States. And in 2006, I moved to Montreal in Canada, ostensibly for 2 years, but here I am 13 years later, and loving it.
Oh, lovely. So, tell us about the moment you decided to become a coach.
Well, I spent most of my career in financial services, and it's a very helter-skelter type of industry, very, very fast pace of life. I think I'm probably an expert on inner city hotel rooms, and going to see one client after another, with a spiel. And it was, I think the last 10 years of my career, it became less about the subject and more about the people who I was talking to keep yourself motivated when you're maintaining that sort of pace of life. It was, you were bringing them information which the majority of the time they knew anyway. They just wanted confirmation, a bit of assurance, um, a bit of confidence. So I think implicitly, though I may not have recognized it at the time, I was actually coaching the individual rather than coaching the problem. Um, and I think it was a very natural transition there. I didn't seem like it at first. It seemed a bit mysterious to me, but um, right now I feel as though it's part of my life. It's more of a lifestyle than an issue. It's not just a job, it's a lifestyle issue, yeah.
Wonderful. So, what brought you to Canada Coach Academy for your certification?
Well, it was a prosaic start. I sort of did a lot of research on the internet, and then I rang up Natalie and we had a conversation. And she seemed very nice over the phone. And I persuaded I'd like to actually meet her first before I made any decision. And it was a coffee shop on Green Avenue in Westmount. And we were both late. Um, so I think that got us off to a good start. And then I signed up, and the rest is history. I was with a great cohort of people, and I felt alive again. I felt sort of, having spent so much time in financial services, and it's so technically driven, it's so money driven, that this was kind of like a breath of life. Concepts like meaning to people, values to people. Those were something which I really hadn't thought very deeply about for a long time. Um, I think it was Carl Jung who sort of said we spend the first half of our lives being ambitious and the second half of our lives looking for meaning. And sort of that phrase or that sentence really resonates with me. Yeah.
Yeah, with me too. That's a beautiful thought. So, what is different about a coaching conversation?
What's different about a coaching conversation is that you're trying to help people realize their dreams. And those dreams may be modest, they may be aggressive. Each person has their own variant, each person is unique. Each person, however they behave, or whatever they've done, has the right to a second chance, right? Um, I think the role of a coach, and I think this is something which normally takes a little while to get people to buy into this or to understand it fully. It's like you're providing a map and you're a navigator on the map. And that scares me a little bit because I'm not a very good navigator. But ultimately, it's about them. It's about the importance of them. It's about their lives. It's about their dreams. It's about their responsibility. It's about their accountability. Um, and doing or being part of that process, there's a throwaway lines that say, when you say to, sometimes people say to their coaches, well, you're the expert at you, and I'm the expert in the process, and that's true. But there's something more to that. Unless two people click, unless there's a meeting of minds, emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually, it doesn't necessarily work as smoothly as the theory might suggest. Ultimately, people like people who have similar values to them. And people connect. This is something Natalie always kept telling me. And it took me some time to grasp. People connect at an emotional level, not at an intellectual level.
That's powerful. So how has being a coach changed your life?
Well, that marriage expression, for richer, for poorer. The second half of that statement is definitely true. But it does provide a more meaningful existence. It does actually focus on value. I think what people sometimes sort of say, it's great you were vulnerable. I think human beings are vulnerable most of the time. It's just how we mask ourselves and how we present ourselves. And very often I find coaching is about recognizing that vulnerability within yourself and actually using that to drive yourself forward to something which you aspire to, or somebody you want to be, or something you want to do. And that old cliche, money isn't everything. Well, it really isn't. It really isn't. And I think that it's just wonderful that coaching can actually be a meeting of the minds to drive people forward to something, to give them a new experience and a new perspective of what they're doing. And particularly in the world in which we live, which is one in which the only relevant question really in the business context is, can you keep abreast of the pace of change? So I have a commitment to lifelong learning. I'm just in the process of finishing my master's degree in psychology. I've been doing those sort of various coaching courses as well as the ICF. And, unless you maintain that momentum, you will struggle. And that's something like that's a concept or reality, if you like, which I struggled with a bit as well. That you have to constantly be reinventing yourself, examining your skill set, what you bring to the party. And that's not just about hard skills, it's about soft skills as well. Now, moving forward, in the era of artificial intelligence, it's about people having complementary skills as well as technical skills. And it's about having a well-rounded education. And I'm not just talking about university degrees, I'm talking about experience of life. One of the things I always try and tell people at some stage, you can have X number of years experience, or you can have X years of experience. The two are very different. X years of experience drives you forward into, I think, a more meaningful place.
That's so interesting, isn't it? How much of that just propels us forward as we're searching for new horizons.
Yeah, and it's about the celebration, and this is again something which took me a while to realize. It's about the celebration of small victories. It's about arriving at your destination, and you're not going to do it overnight. And you have to set yourself sort of small, medium-term goals, but goals are always only very short-term. It's about goals and purpose. And the celebration of those goals leads to purpose. And I think that purpose, certainly the values, which in many senses are those goals, do change over time. And I think a purpose probably is slightly more stable over the lifespan, but that again, it does change a little bit as well.
It sure does. So how then does all that impact your mission, Ian? What is your mission as a coach?
I think the world of artificial intelligence is a reality. We're going to have to live with it. It's frightening. as a former economist, I question sometimes its value from the perspective that machines are replacing human beings. And as that happens, there will be a lack of demand in the global economy. And you can see that now with large deflationary pressures, which the world is in. So we're more than 10 years into a business cycle upswing in the United States now. It's the longest in the post-war period. And yet there's hardly any inflation around. The labour market's very tight because there's no real bargaining power in the labour market. You know, people are substitutable across national boundaries, and you can talk about protectionism, you can talk about national interests. That ain't going to change. It's about how we use that technology to our best advantage. So one of the things, for example, is drug trials. Drugs can help people if they're part of the average within the cohort, but they're always outliers. And technology and big data enable us to target those outliers and to target drugs to the people who fall outside the mainstream. Mm-hmm. And there's no doubt about it, technology has done wonderful things in terms of bringing education to rural areas, particularly in Africa, for example. But it's also damaged a lot of people. There's lots of evidence basically says kids learn best the old-fashioned way when they're asked to write something, when they're using multiple parts of their brain, when they're in the learning process. And just something getting absorbed in the internet or an iPad all day long is probably not the best way of learning. And it's addictive, and it leads to short-termism, and it leads to instant gratification. I'm sure you're aware of all those issues. So I think we have to use technology more effectively. I think the best way of using technology more effectively is to get to know yourself, to actually understand that it is a tool, but you remain in charge, that your uniqueness as an individual is not altered, that you're not just within the corporate space an item on a spreadsheet, as I think is too often the case these days. You have something to offer.
Right. So when it's looked back on your time in the world, what is your footprint?
My core?
Your footprint on the world. What has been your impact? Once you've left this life, what will have been your footprint on the world?
I hope that I think it's just starting. My footprint hasn't been made yet. I'm reinventing myself. I'm moving into a new sphere. I think that I did something for others beyond myself. That maybe I think happiness is an elusive concept, and chasing happiness is something which maybe is a contradiction in terms. It exists at a moment in time. But I help people to get a more happy, sort of more meaningful, more satisfied life. More meaningful, more satisfied life. I think that's the footprint I'd like to leave.
Oh, that's lovely. And I think it fits well with all the other things you've been talking about today, the progress, the lifelong learning, the impact you can have as a coach within this changing world of technology. So here's an interesting question. If you could write a message for the world to see on a billboard, what would that billboard say?
Empathy is the core of a strong community.
Oh, beautiful. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I think so much in life, whether it's personal life or business world, is about understanding other people's needs and seeing it from their perspective. The jargon used to be solution-based sales in the financial and industrial world, for example. Mm-hmm. And then I think the world changed. I think in a sense that was a little bit arrogant. There was an assumption that people didn't know what they wanted, that you were going to actually give them something which was the panacea to all their problems. And I think modern businesses understand the need for change, and they understand things better than they did. And they want to change, but very often they can't figure out how to change. And partnering in an empathetic relationship to help them make that change, I hope can make business more respectable, more thoughtful. Several people recently have begun to talk about big titans of industry, the Warren Buffetts of this world, and even Bill Gates, how capitalism perhaps isn't working very well. It isn't meeting the needs. I entered the business world in the early 1980s, and back at that time, there was a tremendous sense of optimism. We thought free market thinking, emancipation, deregulation would solve a lot of problems. And for a while they did. You got much faster economic growth. But it also created a more materialistic society. I forget who it was who wrote that book, Affluenza, but I think that's a very good description of what it ended up as. And I think now there's a cynicism that a lot of the business titans are waking up to the fact that inequality, which is being developed out there, is not sustainable. But there's a lot of cynicism about their motives. They would say that after they've made so much money, wouldn't they? So I think that if we exhibited more empathy for what was going on in the first place, the data is very clear. No college degree in the United States, no improvement in living standards over the last 30 years, for example. Put yourself in that person's shoes. Your quarterly P&L statement looks very robust. You know what business is reality, and business is necessary. It creates jobs. It provides people with their needs. But I think somewhere along the line, we misunderstood what those needs were, and it became a very, very materialistic set of needs. And I think the inequality, which has now developed, it's not about jealousy. It's about, as human beings, we continually compare ourselves to other people. We are social animals, and the fact is that inequality between countries has diminished quite dramatically over the last 3 decades. Depending on how you measure it, this is a slightly technical observation, depending on which price deflator you use, China is now the biggest economy in the world. Go back 20 years ago, the US was up there and China was right the way down there, and that's changed dramatically. So that's an example of how inequality between countries has diminished quite dramatically. But inequality within countries, and this is true of the developing as it is of the developed world, has increased dramatically. People are not actually communicating down that income chain or down that wealth chain. We compare ourselves to people just below or above us on that totem pole. And I hope in some small, modest way that coaching can actually break that down, that the world of political ideology, and this is what's so scary about the modern world, where back in the early 80s, there was a reaction against state ownership, about regulation of the economy. And there was a hope that a freer market economy would actually create a more prosperous, optimistic, faster growing world. But what we ended up with, as I think one philosopher have observed, is not so much a free market economy as a free market society. The values became financialized. I'm not sure if that's the correct word, but certainly they became very much more monetized. Think of the ability to skip the line at an airport, for example, if you're traveling at the front of the plane. How valid is that in the modern world? It gives the businessman who's going on business who has to go to meetings. Yeah, I mean, great.
Yeah.
But what about the mom or the guy who's traveling at the back of the plane? Doesn't he have rights as well? Doesn't what he's going to do at his destination, doesn't he have the right to arrive refreshed and not hassled and everything like that? So it's an example of the way we started up trying to create a free market. We ended up creating a free market society, and I think the whole thing went a little bit too far. And there's no political ideology which is available out there to break that down. And I think communication through coaching and through identifying needs, and I make the distinction between needs and wants, is an integral part, from my perspective, of that whole coaching process.
Right. So it's so powerful, the impact that coaching can have on so many scenarios. And it's one-on-one, right? It's little by little. But
yeah, and it's each to his own, but I think in where I'm gradually moving to is becoming like a way of life. It's not been a psychologically easy adjustment for me. Natalie will tell you, when I first started, she first started training me, I was always very quick with the ready-made answer. And now I think I always perspective sought, but I didn't always perspective take. And I think what coaching has taught me is perspective taking is really the only way forward. That the power of a community is always going to beat the power of somebody working on their own. And when I coach young entrepreneurs, very often they understand the complexity of the world much better, I find, than a lot of very much more experienced businessmen. But they overlook that however bright they are, how gifted they are, that it takes a team to achieve something. And unfortunately, that message has been corrupted by, in some ways, in the corporate world, with sort of the emphasis on team, and downgrading the individual. I'm not talking about that. I think the difference between entrepreneurship and more advanced companies, more mature companies, is precisely that the entrepreneurs recognize the importance of individuals. Maybe don't always get themselves working as a team as well as they could do, but once the organization reaches a certain size, you become anonymous. And I think coaching is also a powerful bulwark against that animizing process, which I just described.
yeah, it certainly can be. Oh, Ian, I think of your billboard message, and I just think that needs to be out there as soon as possible. Maybe we should rent some space for you.
I'd love that. I'd love that. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you so much for all you've shared today. With all your thought, your experience, there's so many. I really truly look forward to seeing all the wonderful things that come from what you've done and how you've grown as a coach. It's a special part to have seen how this lifelong learning has impacted you.
Yeah, I think there's a final thought. You're always growing. And as long as you're always growing, you're always hopeful. As long as you're always hopeful, you're always optimistic.
Oh, I love that. Thanks for sharing that as well.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, hope to hear from you again soon. Please keep us posted on the wonderful things you're doing out there in coaching world.
Thank you very much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.